European Commission has formally proposed new sanctions on Russian energy exports and financial institutions.
A second group of Ukrainian and Russian prisoners of war were returned home on Tuesday as part of a deal made during direct talks in Istanbul on June 2nd.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz accused Russia of war crimes after attacks on Ukrainian residential areas.
The United Kingdom will impose sanctions on Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir over their comments on Gaza and the West Bank.
During the second day of the UN Ocean Conference in Nice, Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urged the remaining countries to ratify the High Seas Treaty before the point of no return.
The European Commission has formally proposed new sanctions on Russian energy exports and financial institutions. The measures would curb operations of firms linked to the Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea, expand the blacklist of Russia's so-called shadow fleet, and target Kremlin-backed banks that facilitate international fund transfers.
Our objective is very clear. We are reiterating the call for a full, unconditional ceasefire of at least 30 days. This pause in hostilities could serve as a vital step towards reducing civilian suffering, allow space for meaningful talks for a genuine peace.
If approved by member states, it would mark the EU's 18th sanctions package against Moscow since the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The most notable feature of the package is a proposed reduction in the G7 imposed price gap on Russian oil, first introduced in December of 2022.
A second group of Ukrainian and Russian prisoners of war were returned home on Tuesday as part of a deal made during direct talks in Istanbul on June 2nd. The exchange began on Monday for soldiers aged 18 to 25 and focused on seriously wounded and sick Ukrainian service members, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Among them were soldiers captured over 3 years ago in the battle for Mariupol, the coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war said. It added that all of those freed had severe injuries and illnesses, including amputated limbs and vision problems. Russia's defense ministry said it also received a second group of exchanged soldiers in the deal, but neither side specified the exact number. The Russian servicemen arrived on the territory of Belarus, where they're receiving necessary psychological and medical assistance. A similar exchange was announced for the bodies of fallen soldiers held by both sides, although no schedule has been released.
Russian overnight attack on Ukraine's capital damaged St. Sophia Cathedral, one of the most famous and the most cherished monuments in Ukraine and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Officials reported that a blast wave destroyed the cornice on the main apse of the cathedral, damaging the monument that embodies the country's spiritual and cultural heritage. Ukraine's culture minister said, quote, "Last night the enemy struck at the very heart of our identity again." Mykola Tochitsky called St. Sophia's Cathedral, quote, "a holy place that has survived through centuries and symbolizes the birth of our nationhood." The 11th century cathedral is the soul of all Ukraine. Russia is waging its war not only against our cities, it is waging a war against our culture, memory and future, unquote. The management of St. Sophia Cathedral has informed UNESCO about the damage caused to the historic site by a recent Russian airstrike.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz condemned what he described as Russian terror against the civilian population of Ukraine and urged the European Union to swiftly impose new sanctions on Moscow. Speaking alongside caretaker Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof in Berlin, Merz accused Russia of deliberately targeting non-military sites in its latest wave of strikes.
Die jüngsten schweren russischen Angriffe auf Kiew und andere Städte sind wieder einmal Angriffe auf die Zivilbevölkerung, erneut schwerste Kriegsverbrechen, keine militärischen Ziele, sondern Terror gegen die Zivilbevölkerung.
Merz added that a larger tragedy had been averted due to Ukraine's air defence. Skov echoed Merz's concerns and said Ukraine was defending not only its own sovereignty, but also the security of Europe.
The United Kingdom will impose sanctions on far-right Israeli ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. The UK Foreign Office said the ministers have incited extremist violence and serious abuses of Palestinian human rights. They will have their assets frozen and face travel bans, a move Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has condemned.
It is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to this kind of measures. I discussed it earlier today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we will hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision.
Both ministers have acknowledged and criticized the sanctions following the announcement.
סנקציות לא מפחידות אותי. בוז לספר הלבן. אני אמשיך לפעול למען המדינה שלנו, למען העם שלנו. אני אמשיך לפעול ולעשות שלא יכניסו הומניטרי לחמאס.
אבל התגובה המילולית תהיה בוז לספר הלבן. אנחנו לא חוזרים לימים האלה. בריטניה ניסתה כבר פעם אחת למנוע מאיתנו ליישב את ארץ מולדתנו. לא ניתן לעשות את זה שוב. אנחנו נחושים בעזרת השם.
Both Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have promoted the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, have called to permanently resettle Gaza's population, and campaigned against allowing aid into the territory. The Israeli Navy says it has attacked docks in Yemen's rebel-held port city of Hodeidah, marking the first time its naval forces have conducted strikes against the Houthis. Late on Monday, Israel issued online warnings to Yemenis to evacuate from the Ras Isa, Hodeidah, and Al Salif ports. It accused the Houthis of using the seaports to conduct attacks. Hodeidah is also the main entry point for food and other humanitarian aid for millions of war-stricken Yemenis since the Houthis seized Yemen's capital in 2014. Since the start of the war in Gaza, the Houthis have repeatedly attacked Israel as well as commercial ships in the Red Sea. Most strikes on Israel have not hit their targets or were intercepted. Writing on social media, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz threatened the Houthis with a naval and air blockade if attacks on Israel continue.
After getting historic support for the High Seas Treaty on Monday from 18 more countries at the UN Ocean Conference in Nice, on Tuesday, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the entry into force is within sight. Guterres urged the remaining nations to join quickly as the pact is just short of 11 more countries to take effect and become legally binding.
There is a tipping point approaching, beyond which recovery may become impossible. And let us be clear, powerful interests are pushing us towards the brink. We are facing a hard battle against a clear enemy. Its name is greed. Greed that sows doubt, denies science, distorts truth, rewards corruption, and destroys life for profit.
If it comes into force, the treaty would be the first legally binding agreement to protect biodiversity on the high seas, which cover nearly 2/3 of the world's oceans. Stressing the importance of sustainable fishing, ending plastic pollution, and seabed mining, Guterres also reminded that climate change goals cannot be ignored.
Last year, for the first time, the annual global temperature was 1.5 degrees Celsius hotter than pre-industrial times. Scientists are clear. That does not mean that the long-term global temperature rise limit 1.5 degrees is out of reach. It means we need to fight harder, and the ocean depends on it, and so do we.
It is considered vital to counter overfishing and climate change and to meet the global 30 by 30 conservation goal. The European debate on minors' access to social networks has begun. 3 European Union member states, France, Spain and Greece, are putting forward the idea of a digital majority, an age below which it would be forbidden to connect to platforms. The aim is to protect teenagers and children from dangerous online content.
Aujourd'hui, dans les conditions d'utilisation de ces plateformes, il y a déjà un âge minimum, c'est 13 ans. Mais le système actuel, on a tous été des enfants, changer sa date de naissance c'est très facile, et donc le système actuel fait que en moyenne les enfants se connectent et se créent des comptes à partir de 7-8 ans. Donc ça doit changer, on a une opportunité à ne pas manquer.
The three countries believe that the algorithms used by social networks expose the very young to addictive content that can lead to increased anxiety or depression. They also argue that excessive exposure may limit the development of certain skills and alter cognitive abilities. The European Union has enacted legislation in the form of the Digital Services Regulation. The text tackles illegal content such as hate speech, terrorism, and child pornography. For industry representatives, new legislation appears premature at this stage.
At this stage, we think that the new rules need to first play out properly. We have not seen all the effects yet. The Digital Services Act for most companies has only entered into force last year. And as I said, we're still waiting for some guidance on the new minor protection obligations. That's why I think it's a little rushed at this stage to already discuss new rules. And I think it's also really important that we take much more into account the reality and the implications for minors in such a crude ban.
The European Commission is currently working on an age verification application. Last month, it also published draft guidelines to protect minors. It proposes measures to verify the age of users or to set children's accounts to private by default. The institution is also conducting investigations against TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook as part of its efforts to protect minors.